When a biker gang leader noticed the Waitress Bruises, he did the unthinkable. It started with the sound of thunder. But it wasn't from the sky. It came from the highway, a deep, rolling growl that made the glass windows of Millie's diner tremble. The sound grew louder until every fork froze mid-air, every voice faded, and all eyes turned toward the dusty road outside. A dozen motorcycles rolled in like a wave of black steel and wind. Their engines echoed through the quiet town of Maple Ridge, a place so small that even the birds paused to listen. At the front of the pack was a man everyone seemed to know, even if they'd never met him. Rex Malone. His name carried weight, whispered in bars, written on the walls of memory. Some called him dangerous. Others said he'd done things no man could ever undo. But those who looked closely saw something else, the calm of a storm that had already passed. Rex was tall, built like a man who had spent half his life wrestling with the world. His leather jacket looked worn by stories, his face carved by time, and his eyes sharp, cold, yet strangely tired, told of too many miles and too few second chances. When he stepped off his Harley, even the air seemed to hesitate. Inside, Mara, the young waitress, adjusted her apron and forced a smile. Her name tag was cracked. Her hands shook just a little as she poured coffee. Life hadn't been kind to her lately, and you could see it if you looked close enough. In her tired eyes, in the faint bruise on her jawline that no foundation could hide. Rex noticed. He always noticed. He'd seen that same look before, on someone he once loved. A look that begged for help without daring to ask. The other bikers laughed, loud and careless, filling the diner with noise and smoke. But Rex sat quietly watching Mara. Her movements were quick, her smile polite, but her shoulders tensed each time a voice was raised. When the manager barked an order from behind the counter, sharp, mean, and too familiar, she flinched, and Rex's jaw tightened. The man was tall, thick-necked, with small eyes that carried cruelty like a habit. He brushed past Mara roughly, muttering something low that made her face pale. Rex didn't speak. Not yet. He'd learned that the right moment mattered more than the loudest reaction. Hours later, when the lunch crowd faded, Rex was the only one left. His coffee had gone cold, but he didn't care. He watched quietly as Mara wiped down tables, moving carefully like someone afraid to take up space. The manager walked by again, bumped her shoulder, and made her spill a glass of water. She whispered an apology. He hissed something ugly under his breath. That was it. Rex stood, slow but steady, like a mountain rising. The sound of his boots against the floor made the man turn. One look into those cold biker eyes and the manager's smirk faltered. Rex didn't say a word, just stared, long enough for the silence to weigh heavier than a threat. Then he left. But that night he didn't sleep. The garage was dim, lit only by a flickering neon sign. Rex sat on a crate, staring at the motorcycle he'd built with his own hands. Around him, his club brothers laughed, drank, told stories. He didn't join in. His mind was stuck on that bruise, that trembling smile, that quiet apology from a woman who deserved better. He thought about the past, about Annie, the woman he once loved and lost because he hadn't stepped in soon enough. He still saw her face in his dreams, still heard her voice in the dark. That memory had hardened him for years. But now, one frightened waitress had cracked the armor he'd built around his heart. And by morning, his decision was made. The next day, before the sun even rose fully over Maple Ridge, Mara arrived at the diner. Her hair was tied neatly. Her smile was fixed. The bruise on her cheek was darker now. She froze when she saw them, the motorcycles already parked outside, chrome glinting in the early light. And sitting at the counter, coffee in hand, was Rex Malone. He looked up when she approached. His voice was low, calm. "You okay, Mara?" She blinked fast and nodded. Too fast. "I'm fine." But her hands trembled as she set down his cup. Rex leaned closer. His tone softened. "Fine, don't look like that." For a moment, everything stopped. The radio hummed quietly. The smell of bacon filled the air. Her lips quivered. And then she broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks, silent and sudden. like rain from a cloud that had held too much for too long. That's when the manager came storming out from the kitchen. "What's going on here?" he barked. But the sound of chairs scraping across the floor answered him. The other bikers had stood, all of them. Their vests glistened with patches, their eyes steady, their silence louder than any threat. Rex turned to the manager, his voice cold as steel but quiet enough to make every word land. "You ever touch her again," he said, "and you'll answer to every one of us." The man tried to laugh it off. "You think you scare me?" Rex took a slow step forward. "No," he said. "I think deep down you scare yourself." The manager's mouth opened, then shut. His eyes darted around. No one moved to help him. Even the cook stopped pretending to chop onions. And just like that, the fight went out of him. He grabbed his coat and stormed out the door, slamming it behind him. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Mara stood there, crying quietly, her shoulders shaking. Rex didn't say much, just placed a few bills on the counter and told her, "You don't owe anyone your pain. You hear me?" She nodded, wiping her tears. And for the first time in a long while, she smiled. A real smile. By evening, the story had spread through Maple Ridge like wildfire. The town that once looked at the bikers with suspicion now saw something different. Not outlaws, not troublemakers, but men who had stood up when everyone else stayed silent. Mara quit the diner that very week. The owner tried to talk her out of it, but she'd already found a new job. At a cafe across town where kindness didn't come with bruises. Sometimes Rex stopped by for coffee. He never stayed long, just long enough to make sure she was still okay. And every time she smiled, he smiled back. Quietly, like a man who'd found peace in doing the right thing. But the story didn't end there. Rex's brothers in the biker club had seen what happened that day. And something shifted in them too. They started organizing rides for women's shelters, food drives for struggling families, and fundraisers for people trying to start over. Soon, the same engines that once made people lock their doors became a sound of hope. The people of Maple Ridge began waving when they passed. Kids would chase after the bikes, grinning. And the town that once whispered about Rex Malone now spoke his name with respect. One golden evening months later, Mara stood outside the cafe, the sunset painting everything in soft orange light. A familiar roar filled the air. A line of motorcycles gliding down the road, their headlights flickering like stars. At the front, Rex lifted one hand in a quiet salute as he passed. She waved back, her heart light, her eyes shining. Because sometimes, kindness doesn't arrive in a suit or a smile. Sometimes, it comes roaring down the highway on two wheels, carrying a heart that's been broken and rebuilt by compassion. And Maple Ridge would remember that day forever. Not for the sound of engines, but for the silence that followed, when kindness spoke louder than fear. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Tales by Nanya, where real stories remind us that even the hardest hearts can still choose to be gentle. Tell us in the comments. Backhand index pointing right medium skin tone. Do you believe even the toughest people can have the softest hearts?